The night air in downtown Los Angeles shimmered with the faint buzz of neon and the soft hum of engines fading into the distance. The charity gala had just ended, a night of polite laughter, flashbulbs, and the steady murmur of admiration that Keanu Reeves never quite got used to. He slipped through the side exit, preferring the quiet alley to the chaotic blur of fans and cameras waiting by the main door. The city was alive, but in this narrow slice of concrete and shadow, everything felt still. His footsteps echoed softly on damp pavement as a light drizzle began to fall, leaving ripples in the puddles that reflected the ghostly glow of a flickering streetlight. He pulled his coat tighter, hands deep in his pockets, ready to disappear into the night like he always did after events like this. No entourage, no driver, just Keanu and the whisper of Los Angeles breathing in the dark. That was when he felt it, the distinct electric tension that comes when someone's eyes are fixed on you. He turned his head slowly, scanning the length of the alley. At first, he saw nothing, just steam curling from a nearby vent, the silhouette of a dumpster, and the faint trail of rain running down the walls. Then, from the far end, a figure stepped into view. The man was tall, dressed in dark clothes, his hair damp from the rain, and his walk deliberate. Not threatening, but unsettling in its confidence. As the stranger drew closer, the dim yellow light revealed a face that made Keanu's breath hitch. It wasn't the kind of resemblance you brushed off as coincidence. The man's eyes, his jawline, even the small scar along his right eyebrow. It was as if Keanu was staring into a mirror that aged differently, one that had lived a slightly harder life. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and low, carrying a strange familiarity. "You don't remember me," the man said, stopping a few feet away. "Should I?" Keanu replied cautiously, instinctively stepping back a pace. The man smiled faintly. "Maybe not yet. But I remember you. I remember everything." Keanu's instinct told him to leave, but curiosity anchored his feet. The stranger's gaze was unwavering, piercing, but not menacing. There was something deeper behind it. Grief, maybe. Then the man said something that froze the air between them. "Do you still keep the note your mother left you? The one she hid in the music box?" Keanu's heart stuttered. His mother's note, something deeply private, something no one outside his family could possibly know. The man's expression softened as if sensing his disbelief. "She told you," the stranger continued, "that love doesn't end, it only changes form. That was the last thing she wrote to you before she—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The way he said it, the quiet tremor in his voice, it was too specific, too intimate. Keanu took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the stranger's face. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone low and guarded. The man looked up at the rain falling between them, then back at Keanu. "I'm you," he said, "but not from here." The words hung in the air like thunder without sound. Keanu blinked, his rational mind clawing for sense, but the man didn't flinch or smirk. He wasn't joking. He was earnest. "I know how this sounds," the stranger went on, "but where I come from, things went differently. The world broke in ways you can't imagine. I wasn't supposed to make it through, but I found a way." Keanu took another step forward, his eyes scanning the man's face for a hint of deception. There was none, only a haunting familiarity, as if he were looking at himself through years of suffering. "If you're me," Keanu said quietly, "prove it." The stranger nodded, as though expecting the challenge. "When you were 12, he said, you ran away from home for a day because your stepfather threw out your sketches. You hid at the old train yard near Toronto and swore you'd never let anyone tell you who you were supposed to be." Keanu froze. He hadn't told that story to anyone, not even in interviews. The rain was falling harder now, a steady rhythm tapping on the metal lids of trash bins and the asphalt beneath their feet. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded away. The stranger took a slow step forward, their reflections merging in the puddles. "I came here because I thought maybe, just maybe, this world could be different," he said. "In mine, I died years ago, during the filming of The Matrix 4. But a physicist I knew, she found a way to cross over. She called it quantum bleeding, a way to slip between realities before one collapses. I wasn't supposed to survive the process." Keanu shook his head, half in disbelief, half in awe. "You're saying you crossed universes? Through what, a machine?" The man nodded faintly. a doorway built on frequency alignment. Every universe vibrates at a slightly different frequency. If you find the right pattern, the right resonance, you can. He stopped suddenly, his voice cracking. But it cost everything. Everyone I knew didn't make it. For the first time, Keanu saw tears gathering in the stranger's eyes. There was no performance here, no act, just raw grief. He didn't know what to say. The rain poured between them like a curtain separating two realities. "Why come to me?" Keanu finally asked. The man looked at him, eyes glinting under the streetlight. "Because you're the only one who can help me fix what I broke," he said. "Our worlds are bleeding into each other. You've already felt it, haven't you? The dreams that don't belong to you. The places that feel familiar but aren't." Keanu's pulse quickened. He had been having strange dreams lately, faces he didn't recognize but felt connected to, a city skyline that shimmered and bent like water. Coincidence, he had told himself. But now, standing face to face with himself, coincidence felt like the one thing that no longer existed. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small, glowing object, circular like a ring but etched with strange markings. It pulsed with a faint blue light that seemed alive. "This is all that's left of the device," he said. "And it's dying. When it dies, the breach closes forever." Keanu looked at the light, then at the man who shared his face, his voice, his sorrow. The city around them felt distant now, blurred by rain and reality itself. Whatever this was, dream, delusion, or truth, it was only the beginning. "You're coming with me," Keanu finally said, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out. Together." The stranger nodded slowly, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion. "I hoped you'd say that," he whispered. As they walked toward the waiting car, the rain softened, and for a fleeting moment, their reflections moved as one, two souls, one shadow, walking into the unknown. The mansion on the hill was silent when Keanu pulled into the driveway, its windows casting faint glimmers of golden light across the wet asphalt. He had built his home for solitude, wide, open rooms where the world couldn't intrude. Yet tonight, that peace felt fragile, like a glass surface about to crack. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the two men stepped inside without speaking. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing the night out and the questions in. The stranger, his mirror self, moved through the house as if he'd been there before. His eyes scanned the photographs on the walls. Keanu and his late girlfriend, the stills from film sets, the faded Polaroid of his band days, a quiet reminder of who he was before fame. The man paused in front of a mirror that hung near the staircase. His reflection stared back at him, at them, and for a heartbeat, the image rippled faintly like disturbed water. Keanu noticed it too. His pulse quickened. He wanted to believe it was a trick of light, the aftermath of too little sleep and too much confusion. But deep down, something inside him whispered that the boundary between reality and impossibility had already been crossed. They settled in the living room. The fireplace flickered to life with a low crackle, filling the room with amber warmth. The stranger sat across from him, leaning forward with elbows on his knees, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. He looked exhausted, not physically, but in a way that went beyond flesh. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying too many versions of yourself. Keanu poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one across. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain whispered softly against the windows, as if the world itself were listening. Finally, Keanu broke the silence. "Start from the beginning," he said, his tone steady but heavy. "You said you came from another universe." "Huh? Why?" The man took a long breath, staring into the fire. "In my world," he began, "we pushed too far. Science stopped asking if we should and only asked if we could. I was involved with a research foundation, funded by the same studios I worked with. They called it Project Mirror." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "The irony doesn't escape me." Keanu leaned forward slightly, the glow of the fire casting sharp lines across his face. Project Mirror. It started as quantum imaging, trying to capture glimpses of alternate timelines. The theory was that every decision creates a split, every what-if forms another branch. We built a resonance chamber, a machine that could tune into these frequencies. But then something happened during a test run. The readings went wild, and before we could shut it down, there was an explosion. The next thing I remember, I woke up in a version of Los Angeles that wasn't mine. Similar in shape, different in soul. Everything looked the same but felt wrong, like a memory with missing details. Keanu watched him closely. There was no arrogance, no theatricality in the way he spoke. Only quiet conviction. "And you think this world is mine?" Keanu said. The man nodded slowly. "Yes, it's the closest one to what I lost. In my universe, you died on set, a prop malfunctioned during an action sequence. I was you there, but now I'm not sure which of us is the original. Maybe both, maybe neither. But I know that something followed me through that doorway. A distortion, a shadow. It feeds on imbalance. The longer I stay, the weaker the barrier becomes." The fire crackled louder as a draft crept through the room, stirring the flames. Keanu felt a cold shiver slide down his spine. "What kind of distortion?" he asked carefully. The man's eyes darkened. "It appears in reflections first. Glass, water, metal, anywhere light bends. At first, it just watched. Then it began to copy. People I knew started seeing versions of themselves, distorted and hollow. Some went mad. Others vanished." Keanu's gaze drifted to the mirror hanging on the far wall. For a split second, he thought he saw movement within it. Not his own, but something slower, darker. When he blinked, it was gone. He turned back toward the man, but the unease lingered. "You said the breach is closing," Keanu said quietly. "What happens if it does?" The man stared into his glass, watching the light fracture across the liquid. "If the breach closes while I'm here, the universes will attempt to correct themselves. Two identical frequencies can't coexist. One must erase the other." The silence that followed was thick. Keanu could feel the weight of those words pressing down, as if the air itself had grown heavier. He took a slow sip of whiskey, his mind spinning through fragments of logic and instinct. "You came here to fix this," he said finally. "But how do we stop it?" "I don't know yet," the stranger admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "But there's a pattern, a convergence point. Every time the distortion strengthens, it centers around one thing. Me, or rather us. The connection between two identical consciousnesses. It's like the universe is trying to merge what it sees as duplicates." Keanu leaned back, the leather couch creaking beneath him. The notion was impossible, and yet everything he'd seen tonight defied the rules of impossibility. "So, what you're saying," he murmured, "is that the universe can't tell us apart. It's trying to make one version out of two." The man nodded. "Exactly. And when that happens, one of us disappears." The room fell into silence again. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Keanu rose and walked toward the large mirror by the staircase, drawn to it without thought. His reflection stared back, steady, composed, but as he looked closer, he noticed something off. The reflection of the stranger sitting behind him wasn't moving. It sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on Keanu's back, unblinking. "Do you see that?" Keanu whispered, his voice barely audible. The stranger turned his head and froze. For a moment, they both watched as the reflection in the mirror slowly turned its head, not matching their movements, but deliberate, separate. Its eyes were hollow, glowing faintly like dying embers. The lights flickered. The fire hissed. The reflection smiled. Keanu stumbled back, his heart hammering. The stranger was already on his feet, his face pale but focused. "It's here," he said sharply. "It found us." For a split second, the mirror pulsed, the glass rippling like liquid, and then everything stilled. The reflection returned to normal, their two faces staring back in silence. The air in the room felt thinner now, charged with something unseen. Keanu exhaled slowly, his hands trembling. "You weren't lying," he said, his voice low, the edge of disbelief gone. "No," the man replied quietly. "And if we don't stop it soon, neither of us will exist to tell the difference." The two men stood there, side by side, facing the same reflection that was no longer just theirs. Outside, the city lights blinked faintly through the fog, unaware that somewhere in the quiet hills above Los Angeles, reality itself had begun to fracture. The night deepened around the mansion like a shroud, quiet and watchful. The rain had stopped, but the air felt charged with static, as if the storm hadn't truly ended, it had just moved inside. The fire in the hearth had died to a bed of embers, their orange glow trembling against the darkened glass of the mirror. Keanu and his counterpart stood side by side, motionless, watching their reflections as though they were observing something alive. The silence was heavy, unbroken except for the faint hum of electricity. And then it began, a subtle vibration in the air, so soft it might have been imagined. The chandelier above them swayed gently. The whiskey glasses on the table rattled with a delicate clink. The mirror pulsed once, as though something beneath its surface was breathing. Keanu turned to the man beside him. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed unease. "It's happening again, isn't it?" The other Keanu nodded slowly. His face was pale, the flicker of the dying fire carving shadows into his features. "The rift is widening," he said. "Each time the reflection reacts, it's aligning both our realities. It's not just showing us anymore, it's connecting us. We're becoming one frequency." The words carried the weight of inevitability, and Keanu felt them settle deep in his chest. For a moment, the air seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on his lungs. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate, not with sound but with something deeper, something primal. Then the lights exploded into chaos. Lamps flickered violently, plunging the room into alternating flashes of gold and shadow. The sound of glass cracking echoed through the hall as a painting crashed from a wall, its frame splitting apart on the floor. Keanu staggered back, his hand bracing against the couch, while his counterpart moved toward the mirror with a strange, grim determination. "Stay back," Keanu warned, but the man shook his head. "I have to see it," he said, voice trembling. "It's trying to merge memories. I can feel it." He pressed his palm against the surface of the glass. Instantly, the mirror lit up with a surge of blinding light, ripples of energy spreading out from the contact like shock waves on water. Keanu shielded his eyes, the brightness searing white against the darkness. When the light dimmed, the room was no longer the same. The furniture had shifted, subtly warped. The photographs on the walls now showed moments Keanu didn't recognize, images of a life that wasn't his. A picture of him standing in front of a futuristic city skyline, smiling beside people he'd never met. Another of him receiving an award for a movie that didn't exist. He stumbled back, confusion and terror colliding. "These aren't mine," he whispered. The other Keanu turned to face him, and for the first time, there was fear in his eyes too. "They're merging," he said. "Our worlds are bleeding into each other. Every second the rift stays open, the differences collapse. Memories, places, people, they'll fuse until one timeline overwrites the other." Keanu's head throbbed. Flashes of images pierced his mind like strobe lights, his mother's voice calling a name that wasn't his, a city engulfed in strange green light, a younger version of himself standing in a burning corridor. He gasped and fell to one knee, clutching his head. The other Keanu rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "Breathe through it," he said urgently. "Don't fight it, it's the resonance sinking." Keanu looked up, his vision swimming. "Resonance," he choked out. "You mean this pain, this noise in my head, is us blending?" The man nodded grimly. "It's the price of crossing frequencies. The universe is trying to correct the anomaly. If it finishes aligning us completely, we'll become one consciousness. One of us will vanish." The room seemed to pulse in time with their words. The walls flickered between colors, alternating between the muted tones of Keanu's home and the harsh metallic gray of some other version, his counterpart's world bleeding through. Then the mirror shuddered violently. From its surface, thin cracks of light split outward, snaking across the glass like veins. Through those fissures, shadows writhed, dark tendrils of energy stretching into the room, flickering and alive. Keanu stumbled backward as one tendril lashed out, striking the marble floor and leaving a charred streak behind. The air filled with a low hum, a sound that wasn't quite audible but vibrated through bone. "What is that?" Keanu shouted. The man's eyes widened. "It's the distortion. It followed me here." The shadows seemed drawn to movement, writhing toward them with slow, deliberate hunger. Keanu grabbed a metal lamp from the side table and swung it toward one of the tendrils. It passed through harmlessly, but the distortion recoiled slightly, emitting a sharp pulse of static. The air around them thickened, the space warping like heat haze. In every reflective surface, mirrors, glass, even the black of the television screen, faces began to appear. Dozens of Keanus. Some looked older, others younger. Some were twisted into expressions of pain, others of anger or confusion. They whispered in unison, voices overlapping in a distorted chorus. One must remain. One must end. The sound sent chills down his spine. His counterpart turned to him, his voice trembling with urgency. It's using our faces to lure us. Don't look at them. Don't acknowledge them. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small circular device, cracked and faintly glowing blue. The same object he had shown before. This is what opened the rift, he said, shouting over the rising hum. If I can stabilize it, I can isolate the resonance, but I need more energy. Keanu glanced around, spotting the surge protector near the entertainment system. Without hesitation, he yanked it free and tossed the plug to the man, who jammed the connector into the base of the device. A surge of light burst outward, bathing the room in blue brilliance. The distortion shrieked, not with sound, but with pressure, like the air itself collapsing inward. The tendrils recoiled, writhing violently before retreating into the cracked mirror. The fissures glowed brighter, the surface rippling like molten glass. The entire mansion seemed to groan, its foundations trembling. Books fell from shelves. The chandelier swung wildly above. And then, with a deafening crack, the mirror imploded, shattering into 1,000 fragments that scattered across the floor like shards of light. For several long moments, neither man moved. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing. The glow from the device faded, dimming to a faint pulse. Keanu looked around. The house seemed normal again. No shifting walls, no foreign memories. But the relief was thin, fragile. His counterpart slowly lowered the device, his hands trembling. That bought us time, he said. But the rift isn't closed. It's just dormant. It'll try again. Keanu looked at him, the weight of everything settling like lead in his chest. Then we stop it before it wakes up, he said firmly. Whatever it takes. The other Keanu met his gaze, something fierce and determined in his eyes. There's only one way to close it completely, he said quietly. And you're not going to like it. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The storm was returning. But neither man looked away from the other. In that moment, they both understood the truth. This wasn't just about two worlds colliding. It was about identity, existence, and the thin, trembling line that separated one soul from another. The storm outside had grown into something unnatural. Not thunder, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the glass walls of Keanu's house. Every mirror, every window trembled as if something was pressing against reality itself. Keanu stood by the massive mirror in his study, its surface rippling faintly like a disturbed pond. Behind him, the other Keanu, the one from the alternate world, clutched his head, his reflection flickering like static interference. It's happening again, the stranger gasped. The boundaries collapsing. His voice fractured mid-sentence, briefly overlapping with Keanu's own, their tones merging into one dissonant echo that sent chills down Keanu's spine. The room's temperature dropped sharply. The air smelled of ozone and wet metal. Keanu could see flashes in the mirror, brief glimpses of a different world, a burned-out city skyline, falling ash, and his own face, twisted in pain, reaching out through the glass. Keanu turned toward his mirror twin, his voice low but firm. You said this would stop once the rift closed. Why is it getting worse? The other Keanu staggered back, gripping the edge of the desk. Because we're too close now, he muttered. We are overlapping. Two versions of the same soul can't exist in one timeline for long. The rift isn't just between worlds anymore, Keanu, it's inside us. He raised his hand, trembling, and for a moment the veins under his skin glowed faintly blue. Keanu instinctively reached out to help, but his hand passed through a haze of static, like touching vapor made of electricity. The reflection in the mirror rippled violently, and both of their faces distorted, merging into one shifting form, a terrifying blend of recognition and alien distortion. For the first time, Keanu saw something else in those mirrored eyes. Not just another version of himself, but something older, a presence lurking behind the glass, watching them both. The power surged and the lights exploded, plunging the room into darkness except for the silver gleam of the mirror. The hum deepened into a roar, and the reflection began to move independently. Both Keanu's frozen as their mirrored selves stepped forward, each reflection acting on its own accord. It was no longer a mirror, it was a window, and whatever was on the other side was beginning to break through. Keanu could hear voices, whispers layered on top of whispers, fragments of memories from lives he had never lived. He saw himself in places that made no sense. A snowy battlefield, a neon-lit tower, a dim apartment where a woman whispered, "Don't forget who you are." His mind reeled. The other Keanu shouted, "They're trying to pull us in. The reflections, they feed on confusion. Don't look at it." But it was too late. Keanu's reflection smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't belong to him, and raised its hand, pressing against the glass. The mirror cracked like ice under pressure. Instinct took over. Keanu grabbed the stranger's arm and yanked him backward as the mirror shattered outward, shards floating midair like suspended light. Instead of falling, the fragments spun around them, each piece showing flashes of alternate lives, all versions of Keanu, a soldier, a monk, a father, a killer. "These are your echoes," the other Keanu said through gritted teeth. "Every choice you made created another version of us. Every reflection is a world fighting to be real." The pieces began to vibrate faster, the room shaking violently. Keanu could barely stand. "Then what happens if they all break through?" he shouted. The other Keanu looked at him with haunted eyes. "Then none of us survive. Reality tears itself apart." For a moment, they were both weightless, surrounded by fragments of their own faces, each shard humming like a dying star. The two men reached toward each other, and as their hands met, the light flared white-hot. When the light faded, the storm was gone. The room was wrecked, books scattered, glass embedded in the walls, but eerily silent. The mirror had reformed itself, smooth and whole, except now there was only one reflection. Keanu looked into it, trembling, unsure which version of him was staring back. The other man was gone. No sound, no trace, just the faint echo of his last words ringing in the back of Keanu's mind. The rift isn't closed yet. He stepped closer to the mirror. His reflection moved as expected, but something in its eyes was off, a subtle delay, a hint of awareness. For a fleeting second, Keanu thought he saw the other him blink independently, a faint smile forming. His chest tightened. The silence of the house pressed down on him, and he whispered, "What are you?" The reflection didn't answer, but in the reflection's background, there was movement, a door opening, a shadow stepping forward that didn't exist in the real room. Keanu's pulse pounded in his ears. He took a slow breath and backed away, but the mirror rippled once more, soft and deliberate, like the calm breath of something alive. The air shimmered, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt. The storm outside began again, faint but growing. Keanu realized that what he'd witnessed wasn't the end of the reflection, it was its awakening. The other him wasn't gone. He had crossed over, hiding behind the surface, waiting. As Keanu turned off the last light and stepped into the hallway, the mirror pulsed one final time, revealing his twins standing in the glass, smiling faintly, a silent promise that their reflection was far from over. Morning light crept gently through the blinds, slicing thin lines of gold across the living room floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and electricity. Keanu sat motionless on the couch, a cup of untouched coffee cooling between his palms. His eyes were fixed on the far wall where the mirror used to hang, now replaced by a rectangular void of faint discoloration. The broken glass had vanished during the night, not a shard left behind, as if reality itself had quietly cleaned its own mess. 4 hours, he'd waited for something to happen, a flicker of movement, a sound, a voice. Nothing came. Only the weight of silence pressed in around him. Yet, deep inside, he felt something had changed. Not out there in the world, but within him. He could sense the echo of that other self, lingering like an afterimage, an invisible twin breathing just behind his thoughts. As the day slowly warmed, Keanu wandered into his garden, barefoot on the dew-wet grass. The world looked serene, birds perched on the fence, sunlight glittering on the pond's surface, wind brushing through the maple leaves. But even in the calm, the air hummed faintly, as though the universe was still vibrating from the storm. He crouched by the pond and stared into the still water, seeing his reflection ripple softly in the wind. For a long moment, he studied that familiar face, the lines of age, the quiet sorrow, the weariness that fame and loss had carved into him, and wondered which version of himself he was really looking at. The reflection blinked, perfectly in sync, but as Keanu leaned closer, something imperceptible shifted. A flash of light glimmered in the reflection's eyes, like the shimmer of another sky behind the surface. It wasn't sinister, it was knowing, as if the other Keanu, the one who had sacrificed himself, was still there, watching through the thin veil that separated worlds. Later that afternoon, Keanu sat at his piano, the same grand ebony instrument he'd owned for decades. His fingers brushed the keys, and he played a melody without thinking, something soft and unfamiliar. The tune drifted like smoke, filling the room with a haunting nostalgia that didn't belong to any song he knew. Midway through, he stopped, startled by a faint echo, the sound of the melody continuing on its own, one note behind him. He turned slowly, and there it was again, the mirror that had shattered days ago, standing whole in the corner, its frame polished and untouched. His heart stuttered. The reflection showed him seated at the piano, yet the reflection's hands were still playing, while his own rested motionless on the keys. Keanu rose, each step toward the mirror feeling heavier, slower, as though time had thickened. The music swelled softly behind him, a duet between worlds. Then his reflection looked up, not at the mirror, but directly at him, and smiled. A small, peaceful smile that carried the weight of 1,000 lives. A tear slipped down Keanu's cheek. He understood now. The rift hadn't been destroyed, it had been stabilized. The other version of himself hadn't vanished into oblivion. He'd become a part of the reflection, a guardian of balance between their worlds. "You stayed," Keanu whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. The reflection tilted its head, mirroring him perfectly now, and pressed its palm against the glass. Keanu hesitated, then did the same, their hands aligning on opposite sides of the cold surface. A warmth spread through his fingers, like sunlight breaking through fog. In that instant, every fragment of memory that didn't belong to him, the alternate city, the loss, the pain, the laughter, surged through him again, not as confusion but as understanding. He saw that every version of himself across the multiverse was connected by a single thread of purpose, compassion. It wasn't about survival or fame or destiny, it was about the choices that defined humanity itself. The music faded. The air grew still. When Keanu opened his eyes again, the mirror was just a mirror, his reflection calm and silent. But something had been left behind. On the small wooden bench by the window, a silver ring rested, identical to the one the other Keanu had worn. He walked over, picked it up, and turned it in his hand. Inside the band, an engraving caught the morning light, always. The same word that echoed in his mind when the other version disappeared. Keanu closed his fist around it, feeling the metal's quiet warmth. For the first time since the encounter began, peace settled in his chest. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of coexistence. He didn't need to question which world was real anymore. Both were, and both versions of him were still walking forward, side by side, across the infinite reflections of time. As twilight descended, Keanu stood once more before the mirror, his reflection bathed in the amber glow of the setting sun. He took a deep breath, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Thank you." The reflection smiled back, the exact same smile, and for just a moment, the mirror rippled one last time, sending a wave of light across the room like the closing of a curtain. Outside, the first stars blinked into existence, scattered across a velvet sky. Keanu turned away, placed the ring on his piano, and began to play again, a melody now complete. Behind him, the mirror stood silent, reflecting not two men, but one whole soul, finally at peace, finally one.